Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Carter Patterson, the 2020 chairman for the Forsyth County Chamber Board of Directors. I'd like to welcome you all to our virtual policy update from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and a special thank you to Ron Eidschog and Tom Sullivan for being with us today. Programming like this virtual meeting is a benefit you enjoy as members of the Forsyth County Chamber. Before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping items with our attendees. Please keep your mic and camera muted during the meeting. If you have a question, please use the chat feature. Your questions will be answered at the end of each speaker's presentation. We will begin our meeting with the legislative and small business update from Ron Eidschog. Ron Eidschog is the Vice President of the U.S. Chamber's Congressional and Public Affairs Division. Ron helps oversee a team of 15 full-time Capitol Hill lobbyists. He is a sought-after speaker, providing an insider's perspective of Congress and appears at engagements with governors, senators, members of Congress, administration officials, and business leaders across the United States. And he speaks to a wide range of international audiences. He is also the Chamber's chief lobbyist on environmental, energy, and regulatory reform issues. He joined the Chamber team in 1999 and has served in a variety of roles. A native New Yorker, Eidschog worked in the New York State Governor's Office of Regulatory Reform from 1995 to 1999 during the George Pataki administration. Eidschog has both a master's and a bachelor's degree in political science from the State University of New York in Albany. He resides in Vienna, Virginia with his wife Pam and their son Evan. Thank you for joining us today, Ron. I hope I didn't butcher your name too badly.
No, thank you, Carter. I appreciate it. It's great to be with you all. So when we set this up and decided to all get together this morning, I was expecting a pretty clean and neat presentation. We're in the dog days of summer now, and I was expecting that we would be able to talk about what Congress did to move into phase four legislation to sort of help small businesses and the business community at large. But unfortunately, my presentation is going to be a lot like the basement that I'm calling you from, sort of messy and disorganized, because Congress hasn't done their phase four legislation. Congress usually works best when there's an action-forcing event. We were expecting that things like the expiration of the unemployment insurance, extra $600, the end of the Paycheck Protection Program, we would have thought that those kinds of important dates in the calendar would have sort of crystallized focus, crystallized momentum, and catalyzed movement. But here we are in the middle of August, and it doesn't look, Congress has largely left town, and we still don't have resolution to some very, very big issues. And it's not going to be until the middle of September that we expect that Congress is going to sort of figure out what the path forward is on what's going to be in this phase four legislation. So like I said, I think it's going to be a little messy in terms of my presentation. So I'm going to just go out there and talk about maybe the 6 or 7 issues that are kind of all over the place that we're going to have to address. Now, certainly the biggest, one of the biggest issues out there is going to be the Paycheck Protection Program. The Paycheck Protection Program has been maybe bumpy in its implementation, but it's also been very, very good at doing what it was intended to do. Let's not forget that the goal of the Paycheck Protection Program was to get a lot of money out to small businesses as quickly as possible. There were a lot of frustrations. The paperwork was difficult, dealing with banks. Banks had a hard time. But at the end of the day, if you look at sort of some of the surveys coming out of NFIB, 9 out of 10 or greater than 9 out of 10 small businesses, more than three quarters of small businesses in America applied for PPP loans. And of those applied, more than 9 out of 10 got those PPP loans. So with the broad brush, the PPP program did what it was expected to do. There are problems with the PPP program. We didn't expect the pandemic to go on as long as it had. sort of the calendar, the dates, the weeks, all of those kinds of things that were expected to provide temporary relief don't really work in a context where it's been 6 months that we're, pretty much 6 months into the pandemic and to the larger closures. There's two bills. There's a House bill and a Senate bill. The House bill was done in the middle of the summer before Congress left town. The Senate has talked about doing a bill. McConnell has his bill. Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the Senate, has a bill. But in these two competing bills, we still haven't seen the path forward. So there's some good ideas there, particularly on the Senate side, looking at, sort of check the box loan forgiveness for smaller loans and things like that. Expanding the programs in both the House side and the Senate side. So, we think that there's a deal to be had on paycheck protection. But again, there's some improvements that need to be made, but we're not going to see sort of a resolution for a couple of weeks. Sort of the bullet point under the Paycheck Protection Program is the C6 issues. C6 is the part of the tax code, 501c6 is the part of the tax code for state and local chambers of commerce. State and local chambers of commerce are among the small handful of organizations that are specifically excluded from receiving assistance under the Paycheck Protection Program. For us, that is a huge issue. I'm sure that for the Forsyth County Chamber, that's a huge issue too. Chambers of commerce, local chambers of commerce are a fixture of Main Street, really important to the vitality of their community. We know that these get-togethers that the Forsyth Chamber is doing is one of the really key things that chambers need to be doing to get the business community on their main streets, on their communities through this pandemic. We think that particularly local chambers of commerce should be eligible for relief too. We think that's important. The House bill is really, really good. Nancy Pelosi's bill on this front is really good. We support the provisions that are in the House bill. We are hanging by a thread in the Senate bill. If you talk to senators, there's rarely a senator out there that doesn't say that C6s, chambers of commerce, shouldn't be included. But at the end of the day, what we're hearing sort of behind the scenes is that we are hanging by a thread in negotiations on the Senate side. We're continuing to push as strongly as we can. I know that you are too. If there's anything that you can do in terms of talking with your senators to remind them just how important you are to your communities, that's really important. But that is one of the big sticking point issues that are out there now as well. Some of the other issues, state and local funding, clearly, as the pandemic has gone on much longer than anyone expected, state and local governments are going to need more money. I think that there's broad brush agreement there. I would be very, very surprised if there is a bill where there is not more money for state and local governments, but Congress really hasn't gotten into specifics on what those things are going to look like. There's also a lot of talk about dealing with K through 12 and what kind of additional assistance schools are going to need. We think that it's critical for businesses to reopen. We need to make sure that our kids are safe. And so K through 12 is a big part of that. We also need to make sure as a business community that daycare providers are not left out of that equation. You hear Congress talk about K through 12. You hear Congress talk less about childcare. And if you look at childcare, small operations with really, really big costs now, $500, $1,000 for hand sanitizer, for masks, for PPE, for other things that they need to do to make sure that our children are safe. Those kinds of costs, eliminate margins, eliminate, the profitability of many of these small businesses in the daycare space, and making sure that these providers can keep our kids safe and remain in business is really going to be a key factor that's out there. That's one thing that we continue to highlight for members of Congress. We're going into some of now the more radioactive issues. We've got the unemployment issue. Now, when Congress first authorized the phase 3 legislation, the phase 2, the phase 1 legislation, the extra $600 in terms of UI benefits was a big sticking point. It's something that we supported. Many people supported getting extra money into the hands, particularly of of minimum wage and just above minimum wage workers, was something that we understood that was important. There's a strong argument to be made that that extra $600 that people were receiving really helped the economy from absolutely, completely cratering in the early days of the pandemic. As we've gone on, we know that that extra $600 is really a big problem and was a big problem until it expired. Bringing employees back with the unintended consequence of, if they come back to work, employers are taking $600 or $400 or $200 out of their employees' pockets, was a consequence that no one wanted to see. And it puts businesses, particularly small businesses, in the position, in the unwanted position of being the UI police. That's a really big issue. The political lines here are stark, where particularly on the House side, particularly under the more liberal members, extra $600 is really something that's very, very important. Less so on the right, less so on the Senate side, where this issue sort of emerged the first go round. There's certainly a compromise to be made here. The U.S. Chamber has talked about some ideas of $600 probably doesn't work, but some sort of dynamic scale probably does. We think that cooler heads can come to some sort of a proposal here, where minimum wage workers can get some sort of additional assistance that is not a disincentive for employers to call their employees back to work, and that doesn't have minimum wage and just above minimum wage employees angry that they are coming back to work. That is going to be probably one of the more difficult parts of the legislation to come to agreement on. And then sort of as a sub-bullet to the extra $600 payments, we have many states that are running into problems on their UI trust funds. UI trust funds, when they run out, can oftentimes trigger automatic tax increases. That's something that we think that Congress has a role to address in the situation, because no one wants to see a tax increase. A major tax increase on businesses and small businesses to deal with UI trust fund in the middle of this economic crisis caused by the pandemic. And then I'm going to probably leave off with my penultimate issue with perhaps one of the more radioactive issues that's out there, and that's the liability issue. If you were a brewer or a distiller, at the beginning of the year, and you turned your operation into making hand sanitizer. If you were a manufacturer that early in the year shut down, and you donated your PPE to frontline medical workers and first responders. If you are a healthcare professional, a healthcare operator dealing with this pandemic, those types of businesses need temporary, timely, targeted liability relief. We've seen lots of, I'm sure that you've seen on social media, on television, excuse me, the calls from trial lawyers saying, if you've been injured by COVID, call us, going after deep-pocketed bad big business who has inflicted this pandemic on you. We know that that is not the case. Businesses that have done the right thing, tried to do the right thing, followed CDC guidelines, followed state and local guidelines, need temporary, timely, targeted liability relief to protect them from these frivolous lawsuits. That's a really, really big deal. Now, even on the left, even in the center, even under some of the Democrats in the House, we have had good traction on this issue. Nancy Pelosi, the House Democratic caucus as a whole, is not very enthusiastic about taking up this issue. Fortunately, Senator Mitch McConnell has talked about this issue being one of the red lines for him in any Phase 4 legislation. We think that that's really good. We are very, very concerned that several weeks ago, the White House sort of pulled out the rug from under Senator McConnell, where they said, oh, that's kind of, this liability stuff is sort of McConnell's priority. That's not our priority. Clearly, the White House wants to get a deal and move forward on Phase 4. They've tried to walk back, sort of undercutting the liability issue. That's one that we are going to need to work very strongly on. But like I said, even among Democrats, even among moderate and centrist Democrats in the House and the Senate, we have had good response that businesses really deserve some sort of protection from the trial bar, because look, this pandemic wasn't our fault, and businesses that are doing what they should be doing to help us recover should get some protection. And you know, really the biggest issue and really the one that caused Congress to sort of throw up their hands before taking a break from negotiations has been the cost issue. And here we have a big challenge among Republicans on the Senate side. Nancy Pelosi, their bill that they passed was, I think, another $3.5 trillion. That's on top of the $3.5 or $3 trillion that was already thrown into the economy. Those numbers are really, really big. Senator McConnell is having difficulty finding consensus among Republicans on either a $500 billion skinny bill that's often talked about, or a $1 trillion smaller bill too. And when the number is between 500 billion and a trillion versus 3.5 trillion, that's a pretty big divide to navigate. There's a fair number of senators who are very, very concerned about the off-year fiscal impact of all the money that the federal government has borrowed, and don't want to borrow any more to get out of this pandemic. So again, the House and Senate are going to come back after Labor Day. I think it's going to be a couple more weeks into mid-September before we really see movement. Like I said, reporting from the messy basement, we're kind of all over the place in terms of all of those issues. But thank you for having me. Thank you for having my colleague Tom, who's going to clean up all my mess when he reports in just a couple of minutes. But I think it's really important that you all continue to get together, whether it's virtually or in person, to talk through these issues, share these concerns, and work through all of this stuff together. So I applaud you for doing this, and I look forward to taking some of your questions.
Very good. Thank you, Ron. Well, we've got one question in our chat box. I can read it to you, Ron.
You go for it, because I'm getting old and I can't read them on my phone. So.
No problem. So first question from Alex Warner. In your opinion of Phase 4 legislation, if there is additional assistances to small businesses, would it be a continuation or a brand new application process for either EIDL or PPP?
So I will talk about this briefly, and then I'm going to let Tom handle this in more detail. I don't think that there's something that a small business should be doing. I don't know that there would be big changes to the process. If you look at what Congress has tried to do up to this point, they don't want to rock the boat too much. I think that that's one of the problems that they've had, which is, you know, they're trying to fly the airplane while they're building it. So I don't think that Congress would change it too much. But I'm going to leave Tom to get into that when he discusses this in a little bit more detail.
Sounds good. And Tom chimed in there too. I just missed that. But and our next question would be, is the U.S. Chamber concerned about the longer term consequences about the fiscal impact of the stimulus spending? Is there a concern about inflation?
So yes, of course, we're concerned about the long-term impact of spending and things like that. But I think what we're most focused on is the problem that's right in front of us. And that's making sure that we don't have this economic crisis that we're in the midst of get any worse. If you look at the stock market and things like that, the stock market has done remarkably well. If you look at some of the unemployment numbers, you know, we're cheering hurrah when new claims are just under 1 million new filings. So, you know, that tells a very, very weird story. The stock market tells a story that you know, that investors are encouraged that we're going to get out of this crisis. And the unemployment numbers show that we're really, really in a terrible spot. You know, I know that some businesses are doing well, but I think across the board, lots and lots of businesses are having huge, huge challenges. So I don't want to say that the long-term concerns about spending need to take a backseat. But what I do want to say is we need to deal with the immediate crisis now and get past that. And certainly the longer term prospects are issues that we're going to need to address. But we're really in a tough spot right now. And we need to get past that. So yeah, we're concerned, but we're much more concerned about the trouble that's right staring us in the face right now.
Very good. Very good. All right. I don't see any further questions. Last call. It won't be last call. We'll actually have some more time.
It's a little early for last call.
Exactly right. Exactly right. All right. Well, thank you, Ron, and we'll move on.
Thanks again.
Yep. We will hear, next we will hear Communities and Small Business Outlook and Policy Update from Tom Sullivan. Tom is the Vice President of Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, working with Chambers of Commerce and the U.S. Chamber's nationwide network. Tom harnesses the views of small businesses and translates the grassroots power into federal policies that bolster free enterprise and reward entrepreneurship. He runs the U.S. Chamber's Small Business Council, gauging those members on a regular basis to increase small business input and involvement in Chamber's activities. Previously, Tom Sullivan was an attorney in the government relations practice of Nelson Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough, a law firm with a major East Coast presence from Tallahassee to Boston. Before rejoining Nelson Mullins, he served as general counsel for the Bipartisan Policy Center, a nonprofit organization founded in 2007 by former Senate Majority Leaders Howard Baker, Tom Daschle, Bob Dole, and George Mitchell. Sullivan represented several clients before Congress and federal agencies and built a small business advocacy platform that included the Coalition for Responsible Business Finance, a group of non-bank small business providers, and the Small Business Coalition for Regulatory Relief. Sullivan served with President George W. Bush at the highest ranking government official charged with exclusively advocating the views and needs of small business before government agencies and Congress. As Chief Counsel for Advocacy at the U.S. Small Business Administration, he was directly involved in more than 100 regulatory and legislative matters. Testified frequently before congressional committees and was a spokesman on economic conditions and entrepreneurship. The hallmark of his tenure at SBA was a national legislative initiative guaranteeing that small business has a voice in state regulatory decisions. Upon leaving government, Tom was named to the National Federation of Independent Business Small Business Legal Center Advisory Board, and he serves on the board of directors of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, a platform of programs and initiatives aimed at creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Sullivan earned his Juris Doctor from Suffolk University Law School in '93 and a Bachelor of Arts in English in '89 from Boston College. He lives in Virginia with his wife and 2 sons. Thank you for joining us today, Tom. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Carter. That introduction will be longer than my presentation. So thank you. Unlike Ron, my basement is beyond messy. And so I have as my backdrop the headquarters building that we'll return to at some point. The banner for our jobs campaign it was a couple of years ago, but that's hanging outside of the headquarters building, and just kind of as a nice reminder of working with Ron and hundreds of other incredible individuals who are fighting every day for free enterprise in this country, and quite frankly, all over the world. Carter, Jesse, James, and all the folks who have dialed in this morning, I want to make sure you know that we are deeply appreciative of the Forsyth Chamber and really 1,600 to 2,000 of your closest friends who run chambers all across the country. You're truly our muscle when it comes to affecting business-friendly change in the administration and in Congress. So thank you for that partnership. I am going to share my screen right now and use a PowerPoint to go through the presentation. There's only 3 slides, and really the reason for these 3 slides is primarily to keep me on track. I tend to get pretty worked up about small business, free enterprise issues. That's my job. And when I get emotional or worked up, I go down rabbit holes, and these 3 slides should keep me on track. Some of this will be duplicative of Ron's comments a few minutes ago, but I'll try to skip over those points just so that we're not wasting your time and get right to several questions. I would like to actually start just by rewinding the clock to 6 months ago. Now, everyone who's dialed in probably feels like I do, and Carter probably like you do, that 6 months ago seems like 6 years ago. But 6 months ago, when it was clear that the coronavirus was going to extract a toll on the US economy, Congress came together to pass stimulus. And the reason I start here is because it was really just a short time ago that Congress came together in a bipartisan way 4 times to pass stimulus, primarily to help small business. And it's remarkable. It restores my faith in the way our democracy works, especially now when it is so frustrating, as Ron had said, that Congress is in a stalemate. So sometimes looking backwards renews the optimism of where we're looking going forward. We are pushing for additional legislation. Ron talked a little bit about that. I'm going to get into some details that answer some of the questions that were asked in the chat. Now, again, kind of looking backwards and setting the stage for some of the small business, how things are going nationwide from a small business perspective. Again, it's good to kind of put what's gone on in context, I think. And in context, you see the number of loans, the number of PPP loans that have been issued. I think it's valuable to understand that this number of loans issued in roughly 4 months is more than the total loan volume in the 65-year history of the Small Business Administration. It just boggles my mind that this was put together so quickly. As Ron had said, it was not perfect. I think my favorite expression of how the program has worked was that it was like a dog's breakfast. I have a dog and I know what that looks like. Many of you may also have pets who knows what a dog's breakfast looks like. Also, I think specifically for local and state chambers of commerce, many of you have in your leadership, actually, quite frankly, almost all of you have in your board of directors or in your leadership a community banker or a representative from a national bank. And I want to highlight this, that at the beginning of the PPP program, there were about 1,200 banks who could offer SBA loans and products. You look at this slide briefly, you'll notice that there are now 5,400 banks, credit unions, community development, financial institutions, and others who are authorized to participate in PPP. Really pretty remarkable, and I think the credit is at that bank leadership at a local level. Many of them serve on chambers of commerce boards and chair initiatives and activities at the local and state chamber level. So we're extremely grateful for their leadership. Now, taking the pulse of small business, which helps me do my job, we have been looking on a quarterly basis about how small businesses are doing as part of our partnership with MetLife. And I do want to share just a few snapshots of what we found recently from our survey work as part of our partnership with MetLife. So kind of a good news, bad news. The good news is we found in our most recent survey that small businesses are really bullish on 2021. When we asked small business, like, what is your level of optimism to investment in 2021? We have 53% of those small businesses say that they're optimistic about 2021. Now, the important component of that number 53 is comparing it to the answers to the same question in May. And we're bumping up. We're bumping up by about 3 percentage points. And that is because of reopenings and businesses starting to get more customers in, more revenue in. The bad news is when you ask these same small business owners, how do you feel your business is doing compared to last year? We actually are down about 14 percentage points in how small businesses look at their current situation compared to last year. Now, these numbers are, again, both positive and negative. I think probably the most shocking, eye-opening data that we've seen is the coronavirus's impact on Black-owned small businesses and minority-owned small businesses. We received feedback from our most recent poll. 66% of minority-owned small businesses believe that they're going to have to close permanently, which is horrible. Also, kind of lends to the frustration that Ron communicated and that many of us feel is that it is inexcusable that Congress is not taking action and negotiating a stimulus package when we see those types of numbers. Now, my teenage boys have told me that when a song is stuck in your head, it's called an earworm. So I'm going to leave you with a little bit of an earworm today, is that when we're pushing for the things that Ron talked about, we're telling Congress it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. And so now the Jackson 5 song ABC will be ringing in your ears all day, because that kind of rhymes with our approach of 1, 2, 3. Now, the reality, as Ron had talked about, is it's actually 4, but 4 doesn't rhyme very nicely. It's not in a popular song either. So the first, as Ron had said, increase financial stimulus. The second that Ron had covered is allow more folks into the PPP program. So for instance, 501c6s, local state chambers of commerce. Third, simplify all of this. I continue to be completely confused. Why would we say that a loan can be forgiven, but then the IRS says, oh, and by the way, if part of that loan that was forgiven is what an ordinary business deduction would be, you can't deduct that from your taxes. That is insanity. And Senator Cornyn from Texas has legislation that we support that fixes that bizarre red tape nightmare where one part of the government is saying we want to free up cash, and then another part of the government, thank you very much, sarcastically, IRS, is trying to take away that benefit. Just doesn't make sense. We also think in the simplicity column that PPP loans for under $150,000 should automatically be forgiven. Small businesses, as many of the folks on the line know, when they applied, they checked a box that says, I certify that I'm going to spend this money the way that Congress and SBA has required me to spend. That's enough for the feds to go after the bad guys, the folks that bought Lamborghinis, the folks that are betting all that money in Las Vegas. Although we want them to spend more money in Las Vegas, but that really is not what PPP is for. There's enough for the feds to go after the bad guys already. We shouldn't be burdening small businesses with doing more red tape, more paperwork in order to get the loans forgiven. So we are working with Congress, and we're fairly optimistic that in the stimulus package, there will be an easy forgiveness component. So what's the fourth? What's missing from easy as 1, 2, 3, ABC? It's liability reform, which is a huge priority for us. I'm actually very optimistic on liability reform. Some folk, this is actually one of those things that doesn't make it into the fake news, that the first liability protection for COVID in Congress was actually proposed by a Democrat, pro-business Democrat, our friend Henry Cuellar from Texas. So there is bipartisan movement on liability protections. It gives me some optimism to that being included in the final package. Now, one of the questions, I'll deal with this now before the final slide and then take questions in the chat function. One of the questions was, what will PPP look like? What are we expecting it to look like in the stimulus that we see? We expect, first of all, that it be reopened. There was $130 billion left on the table when the application deadline of August 8th came and went. We believe, well, actually, we know from survey work, there's a lot of small businesses that still want to access PPP, primarily minority-owned businesses that don't necessarily have banking relationships, and sole proprietors. Sole proprietors that have not taken out loans have a little bit of more difficulty in accessing the banking system. They need the PPP to be reopened. We also believe that there's going to be an opportunity for some small businesses, a targeted number of small businesses, to take a second PPP loan out. What we have seen is if you're at 35% of your receipts from a similar quarter last year, you will then qualify for a second PPP. There was a question about what about SBA's economic injury disaster loan. We are in agreement with Speaker Pelosi that the SBA disaster loan should remove the $150,000 cap and allow for businesses to apply for up to $2 million. The way that SBA's disaster loan program, the economic injury disaster loans, have been designed for disasters for a long, long time. That's something that we've pushed for a long time. It is in Speaker Pelosi's legislation. We're less optimistic that that be included in the stimulus, but it is certainly a priority. Last, but certainly not least, as an advocacy organization, one thing that traditionally we're not very good at is actually getting tools and tips to small business owners. If a small business owner says, hey, how do I fill out my taxes? Generally speaking, we can't answer that, but we can work with those businesses to advocate for lower rates and to pass tax cut legislation. We've actually shifted that paradigm in the last 5 months. We've shifted into making sure that small businesses have access to tools and tips that boil down federal assistance in ways that I, quite frankly, that I can understand and that small businesses can understand. It is our goal to get that information to the Forsyth Chamber, all chambers of commerce, all small businesses. I love the term that this information is a chamber's R&D. Ron and I were on a a call with a chamber last week, and the chamber executive said, "We love this for our R&D, rip off and duplicate." And we want that to happen. Plagiarism in this case is the most sincere form of flattery. And we're trying to produce information that will help in both English and Spanish. And we view this as a resource to help small businesses figure out all of the complexities that exist, A, to access federal resources, and B, to reopen or stay open and make sure that their employees stay safe and their customers stay safe. All of this information is on our small business digital platform. That URL is towards the bottom of this slide, uschamber.com/co. So with that, I will open it up to chat questions. Let's see. Hey, Ron, if Ron is still on, talk about further relief on 301 tariffs. Is Ron still on?
I do not see Ron on at this moment.
That's from Chris. I'm
Hey,
on.
Awesome.
Chris, you want to jump in on the 301 tariffs?
Yeah, so, Trump retroactively dismissed many of the 301 tariffs last September, but those came back into effect on August 7th. So some of them were relieved again, but many of them weren't. And so I'm looking at 25% tariffs on a lot of my inbound product coming in right now.
Well, thank you for that. Let's see, I have another question. How do you see balancing spending for COVID-19 response with other major needs like transportation, infrastructure that drive the economy? So this is interesting because this is actually, I'll pretend I'm Ron Eidschog, really the primary lobbyist on all this stuff. This is really a key distinction between Speaker Pelosi's legislation and what Senate Republicans want. Speaker Pelosi's legislation basically has everything. I joked the other day, it has so much in there, it turns the Pentagon into an octagon. I mean, that's a little bit of a laugh line there, but it takes care of a lot of things like infrastructure and others. And the Republicans have said, hey, we appreciate the thought, but the price tag is too high. So that's where the negotiation has to happen. And quite simply, we think that they've just got to get talking. I mean, Speaker Pelosi and the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, talked yesterday. Reports from that discussion were not positive, but still, at least they're talking. Little bit of a hint here. When Secretary Mnuchin starts talking with Speaker Pelosi, that's when we're going to know that the negotiations are starting to happen. A little bit of an inside baseball there. Question about U.S. citizenship requirements to apply for PPP and EIDL. That's not going to change. There is no stronger advocate for legal immigration and the power that has for the economy than the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. But it is going to be a bridge too far to change that requirement on PPP and EIDL applications. Those are, I think
you've covered questions in our chat feature. Does anybody else have any questions for our guests today? All right. Well, I am not seeing any. Tom and Ron, really want to thank you guys for joining us today and answering all the questions we had for you. And it was very interesting. I got a lot out of it. And, I guess all we can do is one step at a time. We're going to get through this pandemic. And I feel real good about our economy. And it's, again, it's been a great to spend an hour with you guys. And everybody, have a great day.
Thank you. Happy weekend, Foco.